right, guys, you can open your Bibles to Exodus chapter 32. And I want to set it up a little bit on where we are. So give a little bit of a Bible history lesson here. Joseph was a descendant of Abraham. And Joseph, in Genesis, he has these prophetic dreams that God is going to do something great in his life, and he has a great destiny. And all of that comes to fulfillment. And he ends up second in command in Egypt and second in command to Pharaoh. And he is respected and favored, and his family has favor in the land of Egypt. When Joseph dies, that all kind of changes. And the children of Joseph, the children of Israel, God's chosen people and nation, they become oppressed and ruled by the Egyptians under Pharaoh's rule. And they begin to cry out for freedom. They're being mistreated. They're slaves. And they cry out for freedom. God hears their cry, and he chooses a man named Moses. And Moses is destined by God to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, an exodus out of Egypt and into freedom toward the promised land. And so God says, Moses, you're going to do this along with Aaron. So Moses, he has the encounter at the burning bush. Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh, let my people go. Pharaoh says no, there's 10 plagues. It's a big drama. It's like the best movie that you could ever, write up there in the book of Exodus. And finally, Pharaoh relents and he says, okay, you guys can go. And the children of Israel begin their exodus out of Egypt, out from oppression and slavery and toward freedom. And then Pharaoh and his armies chase them down, and there's the big moment at the Red Sea. In a miraculous display of God's power, God parts the Red Sea, and the children of Israel walk to freedom. And then they're in the wilderness. And what happens is on this journey, lots of things happen, and we're going to pick up on the story. But in Exodus chapter 20, God comes and he speaks to Moses, and he gives the 10 commandments. We first see the 10 commandments here in Exodus 20. And as you can imagine, 400 years in slavery, these people have no identity of their own. They know Egyptian customs, and they know the Egyptian way of life. And God is saying, you're my chosen people. You need a new way to live. You need a new set of rules and statutes. And so he gives them the 10 commandments and all these statutes to live by through Moses. And there's this covenant that gets made where God says, do you agree? Will you be my people, and will I be your God? And the Israelites say, yes, we agree. We will be your people, and you will be our God. And here in Exodus 32, they're at Mount Sinai, and Moses is on top of the mountain, and what's happening is he's getting the tablets of the 10 commandments. They've been given the word, the spoken word, and they know them, but God's going to inscribe them on tablets for them to have as a physical representation of these 10 rules. The Israelites don't know that that's going on. Moses is on top of the mountain receiving this. God's going to write them with his own finger. But the Israelites are down at the base of the mountain, and they're wondering what's happening. And this story that we're picking up on, we're going to look at what gets exposed during this time and the significance of what's going on at the base of the mountain with the children of Israel, okay? So Exodus 32, verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this man Moses, who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So Aaron said to them, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And the Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I make a great nation out of you. Oops. They made a boo-boo. And Moses is the great intercessor, and he talks with God and kind of turns the wrath from completely destroying them. There is some consequences as to what happens. But we're going to talk about this story. before that, one of the great purposes and functions of Jesus when he was on the earth was that as a teacher. He was called rabbi, which was teacher. And we see in the life of Jesus, he's a phenomenal teacher. He's a master teacher. He's like a Jedi master, right? He is using every opportunity to teach the disciples about the character and nature of God. He's using every opportunity to reveal the kingdom and reveal who the Father is. Like things that the disciples thought were so meaningless or pointless, loaves and fish, a storm, a woman that he stops to talk to. Things that the disciples thought were in the way or not purposeful, Jesus pulled great meaning from and used those opportunities to teach them constantly. He was always teaching, he's stumping them with these parables and what is he saying and what does he mean by that? And he's always using life as the classroom to teach who he's encountering about who God is and the nature and character of the kingdom and what it means to follow him. And this is who God is. God is the great teacher. And he uses our life. The Banning last week said it so great. He said the wilderness was Israel's classroom. And God uses life and the instances and circumstances of life to teach us. He's always wanting to train us and equip us and develop us and teach us. This is who he is. He is a teacher. But what happens is if we don't understand that about God, if we don't understand he's a teacher, he's a sneaky teacher, he's a purposeful teacher, and he's a constant teacher, we will misunderstand seasons of life, and then we don't get the lesson that God is trying to give us. And one of the ways this manifests the most, I think, is in seasons of waiting. You see, we equate waiting with kind of meaningless time. When you're waiting in the waiting room at the doctor's office, you're like, this is completely pointless for me, right? I am waiting because my doctor doesn't have his stuff together. I'm waiting because they're running behind. I'm waiting because someone else was late. But this waiting room, as it pertains to me, is very pointless. Why did they make the appointment for 1 o'clock if they're not going to see me until 1:42? I don't know. This is a mystery we'll only know in heaven. And we get antsy, and we get frustrated, and we get irritated in the waiting room because we're like, this is doing nothing. I'm not progressing. There's no point to this waiting. But God is different. When you're waiting in your relationship with God, he's not a doctor that's running behind. He's not like, I'm so sorry. I don't totally have my files together. I'm going to need about 79 minutes while you wait here frustrated. God's not running behind. God's using waiting to teach us something. God doesn't waste waiting. He uses it to develop us and to do something purposeful. God, it's not meaningless. It's very meaningful. In meaningless feeling, when it feels meaningless in seasons of waiting, God is actually doing something of great meaning in us. But it's our job to lean in, and it's our job to discover that meaning and purpose. And time again, the Israelites find themselves. We get to read this story, all these stories of their journey from, they had deliverance from Egypt, an inheritance in the promised land. And that journey from point A to point B was not a nonstop progression. They actually waited a ton. And we can pick up on these little moments of waiting and actually learn something. And this is a story about what gets exposed to us, in us, when we find ourselves stuck in the waiting room, so to speak. We'll use that analogy. Because waiting, the truth is, as much as I hate it, and I'm not a very patient person, waiting is a part of a relationship with Jesus. Waiting is a part of life. We're not getting away from it. And because of that, God loaded Scripture up with lots of encouragement to those who are waiting. You could do a quick search on what does the Bible have to say about waiting, and you're met with wonderful scriptures. Psalm 27:14, wait for the Lord, be strong and take courage, wait for the Lord. He knows you're going to wait for him. So in that waiting, be strong and take courage. Lamentations 3:25 says the Lord is good to those who wait on him, to the soul who seeks him. Psalm 37:7, be still and wait patiently for the Lord. And we see many people in the Bible have extraordinary stories of waiting. Abraham waits for a son. Joseph waits for the fulfillment of prophetic dreams. David waits for the kingship. The moment that David is anointed and called to be king and he becomes king, requires so much waiting. Mary waits on the arrival of Jesus. Jesus waits to be released into public ministry. The disciples wait on Jesus in the upper room. We today are waiting for his return. Like, waiting is just a part of our life as a believer. And waiting is a part of adulthood for anyone. And I feel very frustrated that no one told me that. I did not know that being an adult would require this much waiting on everything, especially the doctor's office. That's why we're going to use this. It's a wonderful analogy because the waiting room at the doctor's office is the great equalizer of life. They don't care how fancy you are. They don't care how busy you are. They don't care what status you have. You can't buy a premium membership to the doctor's office that bypasses the waiting. And I'm commissioning that they do. I'm petitioning for it. I'm like, come on, can we get like some fast pass Disneyland action here? Like, you know when you go to Disneyland and you have the fast pass and you're walking by all the peasants who don't? You just feel so good about yourself. Like, yeah, that's right. I know Walt. Mickey's my friend. Not gonna wait here with you guys. You just feel so fancy. That doesn't happen at the doctor's office. And I've had 3 kids, and they make you go to the doctor so much when you're pregnant. And I'm like, I am a frequent member. Can I please, do I really, I'm like huge and pregnant. Like, this is my 18th appointment this month. Do I have to wait? They're like, so sorry, you have to wait. Like, it's the great equalizer. Everybody has to wait in the doctor's office. And we hate it. Again, we're all laughing at the uncomfortability and the frustration because we all hate waiting. Nobody's like, you know what I love? Waiting. You know what I do in my free time? I just wait around for things. No, we're constantly trying to bypass waiting. We want fast cash. We want fast deliveries. We want fast weight loss. We want fast food. We want it fast. We do not like waiting. But in a culture that despises waiting, as we represent another culture, we actually have to lean into it. We have to lean into waiting because what happens is when we cannot wait, and this is what we see happen with the Israelites, when they couldn't wait, they turned their gaze to something else that didn't deserve their attention. They turned their gaze to something they should never have been looking at. When we are waiting, there is a temptation for our gaze, our worship, our attention, and our focus to wander to unworthy things when we can't embrace waiting or when we don't understand that God is using it. Before streaming platforms, I know you don't know this. It's a shame. We should just show them some regular cable TV so they get exposed. You had commercial breaks, right? And so there was a huge, I don't know if anybody had this experience, there was always a huge fight in my house. I'm a pretty impatient person, but my brother was even more impatient when we were growing up. And when we were watching TV, the minute the commercial break would start, he would flip the channel to another TV show because he didn't want to wait for the commercials to end. And this was just every Saturday morning. I'm like, we're in the middle of a show. Because without fail, every time he would miss the return of the show because he's lingering on another channel too long, and he can't sit through the commercial break that we're watching 6 different shows, catching parts of things. I'm like blending the storyline of Full House with Blossom, and then we're watching Cops. We loved watching Cops. I don't know, bad boys. What you gonna do? So I'm like, what's happening? Just stay on one channel. When we can't wait patiently, we might end up turning our gaze, flipping the channel, and entertaining ourselves with something that we were never intended to look at. This is what happens with the Israelites. They couldn't wait. And so they had this idol. But God built the waiting room because of what he can do in it. God values the waiting room. God's present in the waiting room. God's not wasting your waiting. He's doing something in you. And it's on us. It's on us to understand that, to lean into it, and to welcome it. We just don't grow apart from waiting. Like, why is it a part of life? Why is it a part of following Jesus? Because growing is a part of following Jesus. Because development is a part of living for God. And we understand this at the most basic level, you guys. We have a term. When you give a child whatever they want, exactly when they want it, we call it something. Spoiled. What does it mean to spoil? To ruin. So we understand in our human condition, if I don't make someone wait, for their good, if I don't cause delay, if I don't make a child wait to develop something in them, patience, delayed gratification, trust, whatever, I will ruin their development. Many of us, we actually want God to spoil us because we're so uncomfortable in waiting. We're so averse to waiting. We hate it. We hate the uncomfortability of it, the challenge of it, the boredom of it, the frustration of it. We believe lies about the waiting. So we're like, just give me what I want on my timeline. And God's like, that will ruin your spirituality. I have a greater purpose. So what are you waiting on? Where do you find yourself in the waiting? And can you shift your mentality? This is not meaningless time. God's not tormenting me. This is not a time to be frustrated and impatient, but it is a time to focus, to lean in, to worship, to believe, to press in, and to be developed. He makes them wait 40 days. Listen, God did not need 40 days to write the 10 Commandments. He's not like, all right, I write, this many words a minute. I got 2 tablets, 10 Commandments. I'm going to need 40 days. God didn't need 40 days. Is 40 just an arbitrary number? Why? Why did he make them wait 40 days? Listen to this. Mentioned 146 times in Scripture, the number 40 symbolizes a period of testing, trial, and probation. During Moses' life, he lived 40 years in Egypt and 40 years in the desert. Moses was on Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights on 2 separate occasions. He sent spies for 40 days to investigate the promised land. Elijah went 40 days without food or water at Mount Horeb. Jesus was tempted by Satan many times during the 40 days he fasted. He also appeared to his disciples and others for 40 days after his resurrection. 40 is everywhere in Scripture, and it symbolizes testing, trial, and waiting. God didn't need 40 days. He had purpose in their waiting. He had purpose in what he was trying to do. And while God is working in the waiting, our job is to worship him. Because the thing is, guys, we will worship something. That's what we were created to do. What were you created to do? You were created to worship. I was created to worship. So when I find myself in between deliverance and inheritance, when I find myself in a season of waiting and delay, when I find myself in the waiting room, I cannot help it. I will look for something to worship. And the Israelites' mistake was they turned away from God to an idol. Be careful what you turn to in times of uncertainty. Your appetite for worship might cause you to make the wrong decision. They were uncertain. They said, Aaron, make us this God. We don't know what happened to Moses. So they're nervous. They don't know what's going on. They don't have all the information. They don't see what God is doing. And in that uncertainty, they built an image. They created an image. In the uncertainty of the waiting, they began to worship an idol. We have to be vigilant in times of uncertainty where the attention of our heart is going. We have to be mindful when I'm uncertain, when I'm frustrated, when I feel antsy, where is my attention going? So 4 things quickly that we may turn to in the uncertainty of this great waiting room in life. And the 4 things are all C's, because as a preacher, you have to alliterate. I don't know if you knew that, but it is true. Okay, 4 things. Culture. Number 1, culture. Aaron gave in to the demands. It was everybody, they came to him and they said, hey, make us this God. Now, Aaron knew it was wrong. Aaron's actually held accountable. Aaron's their leader in lieu of Moses. And when Moses comes down, he goes, Aaron, what happened? And Aaron's like, he has a lapse of judgment and he abdicates some good leadership. He goes, I don't know, everybody wanted it. Like they all wanted it. In times of waiting, the temptation is to go, what's everybody else doing? What's culture say about this? Because culture says, that's taking too long. Culture compares timelines. God creates them. God's not like, hey, this is your timeline of your life. It should look, you're 35. You should own a house. You should have 2.5 kids. You should have this much in the bank account. You should be this far in your career. You should definitely be married. You should weigh this much and make sure you don't have this many wrinkles. Like culture says this is what your life should look like compared to everyone else's. God's creating a brand new timeline in your life specific to your destiny and to your calling and what you're created to carry and do. So this is why we cannot look to culture in delay and in waiting and say, what's everybody else doing? This is what led them to make the image. This is what led Aaron gave into the pressure of culture. Culture says it should look like this. Culture says, we got an answer for that. You're waiting? You can do something about that. Culture says, take matters into your own hands. These are all the lies that culture can throw at us. And so when you're waiting, be careful. Resist that urge to look to what culture is doing, because we know this, and I'm just giving you a friendly reminder. Culture doesn't know. Like, we know this, right? But we need the reminder. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what they're doing. Following the current of culture and popular societal opinions is the equivalent of getting in the car with someone who doesn't know where they're going. And as a wife, I have a great story about this. My husband can sing, as we all just saw, and he's ridiculously good looking, but he cannot, he doesn't know where he's going. He's not directionally gifted. He's what we call directionally challenged. Now, the Lord did a beautiful thing in his life by bringing me to him. And so we had a situation a couple years ago. We go to some church event, and it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We had taken 2 separate cars, and as we're leaving, he gets in his car, I get in mine, and I say, hey, I'll follow you. I had an Aaron moment. I had a lapse of judgment. I don't know why I said that, because I knew better. He doesn't know how to get home. So I get in the car, and a couple minutes into the drive, I think I better pop up by GPS, just to be sure. So I'm looking, and now I use Google Maps because the Lord uses Google Maps. People who are using Apple Maps, you probably get lost a lot. So I'm thinking, okay, so we're driving, and I'm not kidding you. He's making every opposite turn. I'm like, what is he doing? It says go right, he's going left. It says turn, he's going straight. And my GPS is just rerouting, and I'm farther away from home. And I like a plan, and we had to be home at a certain time. I'm not down for just driving around. I don't get people who are like, I'm just gonna go drive. I'm like, where? Where are you gonna go drive, and why? Do you know how many other things you could be doing? Anyway, another story, another time. So he's driving, and we're getting farther from home, and so I'm thinking, oh, he's using Apple Maps, because he would. And he's going, so what's going on with him? So I flag him down. I couldn't call him. There was something wrong with the service. I tried calling him. I flag him down. We pull over on this, middle of nowhere road, dusty road, and I pull up. I roll my window down. I say, Derek, what app are you using to get us home? And he's like, turns the radio down. He's like, huh? I'm not using any app. I'm just driving. Oh my gosh. He's like, I'm listening to music. This is awesome. Why, are we not close to home? I'm like, no, we are so far from home. Follow me. We get behind culture, and we're like, well, just do what you do. Just use your methods. I'll use your standard. Culture is destinationless, directionless. They're not being guided. And we're like, why do I always feel like I'm lost? And why do things not work out? And there's not blessing on my life. And I feel like I'm just wandering in the wilderness over and over and over again. Do not follow culture when you're waiting. Culture, compromise. I gotta go quick. Compromise. In their waiting, they compromised the first commandment. It's amazing. God must have just been he was so irritated. Their first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. They're like, yes, of course. We would never. 30 days into waiting, they're like, make us a golden god. They compromised. What happened? They were asked to wait. And their impatience led them to a compromise that cost them. This is your God who brought you out of Egypt. It's hilarious. They attribute the miracle of their deliverance to something that didn't exist the day before. How many of us when we're waiting on an answer, a breakthrough, a reconciliation, a relationship, a check, a promotion, a result, we forget what got us that far. They said, this is the God who brought us out of Egypt. God will do great works in our life, and then we get asked to wait. He gives us a promise, he gives us a word, he gives us, some picture of our future, or commissions us forward, and we're like, this is awesome, yes, we're going towards inheritance, promised land, here we come. God goes, hey, pause here and wait. Who are you, God? You've never moved in my life. I always am ending up in positions like this, failing to see we're only from point A to A and a half because of God's goodness and grace and favor and blessing. They were in the wilderness because of God. They were out of Egypt, but they didn't trust that he was going to take them all the way to the promised land. So the minute they get asked to wait, they begin to compromise their worship. And what do they worship? They make this golden image out of the earrings that they were wearing. You know where they got that? Egypt. You know who gave them that? God. They had nothing. They were slaves. They had nothing. But God set it up that they would leave with plunder from the Egyptians. And they had all this gold. And they used the gifts that God gave them and turned to worship their gifts over the giver. We do this with our personalities. I'm just so darn tough. I'm just such a networker. I just have favor with people. It's amazing. It's amazing what it's gotten me. I'm very entrepreneurial. You should see my bank account. I'm really resilient. And we begin to worship our makeup over the God who gave us that makeup. We begin to trust in that. We begin to adore that. We begin to long for, I'm going to develop me. We have leadership development books like no other, but our prayer life is zero. I just need to develop myself. I need some more strategy. I need some more savvy. I need some more know-how. I need to do a better budget. How about you need to find yourself in intimacy and prayer and worship actually God who's made you that way over what you can do. Comfort, culture, compromise, comfort. This golden image is a picture of what they knew. It was just comfortable. That was a common idol in the ancient religions, and so it's what they knew. They had seen it before, and so they get uncertain, they get bored, they get frustrated, they get disappointed, they get whatever comes out of us in the waiting. They hit that spot, and they go, let's just get comfortable. Let's just turn to something we know. In our waiting, if we revert to what's familiar, it will keep us from the mountaintop experience. Moses was having mountaintop revelation. He was about to bring them the very thing that would turn the trajectory of their journey. But they turned to what they knew. Man, when we get comfortable with church, I come here every other week. Sit in my seat that I always sit in. Scroll the same app I always scroll when the preaching happens. No. I go to lunch at this, we just get in a routine. We get comfortable, and then we wonder, man, I haven't felt the fresh fire of God in a long time. I'm going to try another church. No, try coming hungry. Try coming expectant. Try getting a little uncomfortable. Sit somewhere else. Step up front and worship. Lift your hands. Lean in. Comfort will keep us from revelation because it's uncomfortable. The unknowing, where you need revelation is in what you don't know. And you are uncomfortable when you don't know. Thank you. Okay, comfort, culture, compromise, control. This message is just for me, so I'm going to turn and just preach just to me right now. Guys, I am a control freak, and I can't even tell you a funny story that makes it lighthearted because it's just so terrible. My husband is not, and he is more enjoyable. I am convinced, oh my gosh, non-control freaks, if you're sitting next to one, just be like, pray for me. They have more fun. Because listen, I know this because I've gone to Disneyland with him. And his experience at Disneyland is, I imagine it's what Walt wanted. Just fun, joy, just wandering around, exploring the wonders of the park. I go to Disneyland and I'm like, doors open at 8, at 8:05, we're at Space Mountain. You got 42 minutes, then you got to go to Autotopia, grab a churro to your left. Hurry, hurry, hurry. My kids are sweating. We're all stressed out. We've all blown the budget, so I'm mad at everybody. No more stuffed animals. We're $3 over budget. Derek's like, oh my gosh, only you could make Disneyland like this. And then you're welcome. You're welcome. It's the gift of the control freak. It's so hard. It's so hard to give up control. And so here the Israelites are, and they're in the waiting, and so they want something they can control. We don't know where Moses is. We don't know what God's doing up there. We don't know when we're going to go to the promised land. What's happening? And so when I'm uncomfortable and I don't know what's happening, I turn to something I can control. You know what we can do? We can make this God. We can make it look like we want and talk like we want and go where we want. And that's the God that will lead us to the promised land. Listen, anything you can control cannot deliver you. Anything that you can control does not contain power. This God was powerless, meaningless, futile. But a God who has power, we can't control that. All we can do is worship it. All we can do is trust it. And so in the waiting, either I'm God or he's God. Like there's no in between, right? It's not like you're God with my plan. You're God on my timeline. It's you're God or I'm God. And which one's going to work out for you? Is he with you in the waiting room, or have you just conveniently kicked him out? It's okay, God, I got it from here. I'll speed this along. People say it should be farther along. I'm going to just control this. We love to control environments. I'm the reason that you have power outages. I'm sorry, because I use my AC all the time. You guys experiencing those? The blessing of PG&E. So when I go into the house, like see, this is the difference of Derek and I. This is why he's so lovely. If he's too hot or too cold, he'll adjust. He'll go, I'll turn a fan on, or maybe I'll put a sweater on, or, change into shorts. The minute I'm uncomfortable with the temperature, I'm the person at the thermostat driving everybody crazy. Like, could you just leave it alone? But this is how we are. The minute we're uncomfortable, I want to go to something I can control. The minute I'm uncomfortable, instead of leaning in, instead of pausing, instead of waiting, instead of asking, what are you doing? I'm going to control externally my environment to make it more comfortable for me. And the difficulty, as difficult as waiting is, here's the beautiful part. It refines us. And this is what we can look forward to. God is a God who wants to develop us, and there are areas that we don't trust. There's areas that we haven't surrendered, and we don't always see it. Sometimes we're just walking around completely unknowingly. We're just like, I actually didn't know I was comfortable there, compromising there, following culture. I didn't know I was controlling that. And so what God does is he'll stick you in the waiting room, and he'll say, let's see what pops out. He'll stick you in the waiting room and say, do you really trust me? Because what happened in the Israelites, in their waiting room, their gods were exposed. Aaron says, okay, these are your gods. These are your gods. This is what you can trust, what you can control. This is what you can trust, what you've compromised. This is what you want, something that's comfortable. This is what you want, something that's cultural. These are your gods. In the waiting, we have an opportunity to run from it, squirm from it, wander around it, and just stay there. Or say, God, what are you exposing in me? Gosh, have I had some idols pop up? The worship team can come on up. Have I had some idols pop up in my life? Am I not fully trusting you? And I'll end with this. They said, make us a God that will go before us. So I said this earlier, I referenced, they believed that God would deliver them. They were okay to trust, and yes, God will deliver us, but we don't trust that he's going to finish it. Now, to get to the promised land, we need something. We need to help God. We need something that will go before us and finish the work he started. We trust that God got us this far, but we actually don't trust that he's going to finish the work that he started. Let me tell you, church, Philippians 1:6 says, he who began a good work in you will carry it through to completion. Not to halfway, not to 3/4 of the way. He doesn't carry it through and then hand it off to you. The God who started the work will complete it in you because he's the author and finisher of our faith. This is who we serve. This is what we can trust. And there they are. They just didn't fully trust that he would do it. They didn't fully trust. From deliverance to inheritance, we need something in the middle. No. You need to worship him. You need to trust him. Stay focused on him. Remember who he is. David Guzik's commentary says it really beautifully. He says, centuries later, the Apostle Paul dealt with the same error with the Galatians. Galatians 3:3, are you so foolish? Having begun in the Spirit, are you now being made perfect by the flesh? Same thing popped up. You trusted that God began in you, but now you think you're finishing the work. It is possible to begin the Christian life trusting Jesus, and then at a later time to trust self or one's own spirituality. Following our own gods is no better for us than it was for ancient Israel. Did you guys pass communion? Just take a bucket at the end there. They're going to pass it down, and we're going to end with taking communion. And I just want you to pause and reflect. We'll worship for a minute, and this is what I challenge you to do. Am I in the waiting room in life? And what's getting exposed in me? What's happening? What am I realizing that I trust in? What am I worshiping here in the waiting? What am I turning my attention to here in the in-between? Am I fully surrendered? Do I fully trust that he's going to finish the work he started in me? Do I fully trust he's going to carry me all the way through to my inheritance, to the promised land? So go ahead and just take communion on your own. We're going to give you guys a minute. Remember the work on the cross. Remember the power of the sacrifice. This is what makes it possible what Jesus did. He died for this. He broke his body and poured out his blood so that we could live in oneness with God, so that we could live trusting him with our whole lives, so that we could have access to intimacy. And in all of that, we can live assured. We can live at peace. We could be a people that embrace the waiting because we remember who God is. We embrace the waiting because in the waiting, we're worshiping. In the waiting, we're trusting. We're not turning to other things. We're not turning to culture or comfort or compromise. Yeah, God, we remember you. Would you be so faithful to gently speak to us today and expose any area where we've not surrendered, any area that we're not trusting? We invite you. Just invite him in. We invite you. Amen.